Guys, Dan Hooker is still that dude. Let me take you back. I signed with the organization September 17th of 2020. We always talked about who's my first opponent going to be. We asked for Tony Ferguson. He turns it down. We asked for Poirier. He turns it down. Obviously I had to do the backup to the title fight, did all that stuff. That was October of 2020. Then by October, November, we started talking about, okay, who's the opponent? Ferguson says no. Poirier says no. Then all of a sudden, the number 5 lightweight, Dan Hooker, who is game for anything, says yes. Obviously, for obvious reasons, I wanted to fight the highest ranked guy I possibly could. Not just because, I wanted to fight the toughest guys. I told Hunter Campbell, I want to fight the toughest guys right away. Either I am who I say I am or I'm not. If I could come in, I go 0-2, cut me, and I'm out. Everybody can make fun of me, go back to Bellator. Make fun of me, I knew you weren't that good. Make fun of me, we knew he wasn't as good as we all thought he was, right? Those two guys turned the fight down, but lo and behold, the man who seems like he never turns down a fight, Dan Hooker, says yes. And I want to tell you this right now. I did not want to fight Dan Hooker. I have said this publicly. I'm not afraid to admit it. All right. A lot of tough guys out there acting like, I'll fight anybody, anytime, blah, blah, blah. Dan Hooker was about the worst draw that I possibly could have ever asked for. 6'1". People were saying he was going to knee my face into the first row. He had just come off of a crazy 25-minute war with Dustin Poirier where he had Dustin Poirier hurt, had Dustin Poirier on the ropes. And we're talking about Dustin Poirier, who was he's number 2, number 3 guy in the world, maybe even the number 1 contender at that point in time, was an absolute stud. Talented, cannot be broken, crazy good cardio. And then this past weekend, it was very enjoyable to watch Dan Hooker. As I said, I was sitting right behind Israel Adesanya, so obviously I was trying to watch, but also enjoying Izzy's craziness that was going on there because the man gets animated when he watches his teammates fight. But man, Dan Hooker versus Jalen Turner was a hard fight. I think to me, it was the most 50-50 fight on the card. It was the most toss-up fight on the card. Both the tallest guys in the division. Jalen Turner has looked phenomenal thus far. His ability to use his range, some tall guys don't use their range. He uses his range extremely well. His 2 and 3 and 4 punch combinations, ending with low kicks or ending with the body shots, which he's put numerous guys down with, I thought was going to be a very, very tough puzzle for Dan Hooker to solve. And Dan, obviously, as you can see, he's bloodied up. His blonde hair, which shout out to Dan Hooker for the blonde hair. I think you should keep doing the blonde hair. I loved it. 2 new leg tattoos and blonde hair. I like your style. Got a nice cut kind of in his hairline, I believe it was, or maybe it was in his eyebrow. Turned his blonde hair red by the end of the fight. Was getting pieced up a little bit. I think Jalen Turner absolutely won the first round. But second round, Hooker came on. I think Hooker won the second round and the third round. No ifs, ands, or buts. And showed that if you don't put Dan Hooker away quick, which I was very lucky that I did, I was very happy that I did in the first round, he continues to get stronger. He continues to download and get better. He continues to learn the different little movements and habits and idiosyncrasies that are going on inside the fight, as well as he lands a couple shots. He starts chasing the knockout, but he really does start chasing the knockout in a very methodical way. He doesn't throw everything into every single punch. And even when he got Jalen Turner hurt, he still was picking his shots. He didn't go crazy. He got Jalen hurt, pushed him up against the cage, and still picked his shots. Head, body, and was using Jalen Turner's huge target that he has of his body, long torso, and was picking his shots well. So I think, as I said in the very beginning, Dan Hooker is still that dude. Dan Hooker now might be a top 10 lightweight. Dan Hooker now can ask for somebody within the top 10, maybe number 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever it might be. So he's still that dude. He's always been that dude. And he broke his arm. He fought the whole third round, maybe even the second round. I forget when he says he actually broke it. He fought at least half the fight with a broken arm. And what did Dan Hooker say? Joe said, "Hey, you might have hurt your arm there. What happened?" "Oh, it's just a scratch." And I know we can laugh and say, "Oh, okay, of course, after the fact, you can kind of play it up like a tough guy." Dan Hooker ain't playing it up like a tough guy. That is how Dan Hooker thinks. That is Dan Hooker's mentality. Once again, why I didn't want to fight him. And I'm not afraid to admit that. It was a tough fight. It was a scary fight. So broke his arm and still refused to not use that arm. Continue to throw big punches with that arm. Continue to still use that arm as a weapon. There's a lot of guys. Yes, the adrenaline is high. Yes, yes, you are numb to a lot of pain, but breaking a bone, whether you feel the pain or not, you know something is different. And especially in the place that he broke it, kind of in that wrist area, it wasn't like it was kind of a knee and it was unstable, or maybe it was a hand and it's kind of in a small joint. It was in the long bone of his arm. And Dan Hooker has some very long arms. You break an arm right there above the glove, every single punch, you might not feel pain, which I don't know if he did or didn't, but you're feeling some kind of crack, some kind of grind, some kind of nasty feeling, as well as swelling, as well as immobility, as well as the fear and the doubt and the wondering of what's going on inside the cage. It's not like the cut looks phenomenal. Like I said, the blonde hair turned red. It makes him look like a warrior that he is. He deserves photos like this. Smile on his face, blood in his blonde hair, looking like Dan Hooker. These are the kind of photos that he should blow up and put on his wall, put on his mantle someday, because this is the quintessential Dan Hooker. And you guys need to be happy that this kind of guy is in this sport, because we don't have a ton of guys in the sport like this. Dan Hooker is a certified one-of-one character and one-of-one athlete. So props and hats off to him. So back to the broken arm. It's not like a cut. It's not like this cut. Yeah, you start to bleed. Yeah, it feels like sweat. It feels like extra fluid. It feels like extra water or sweat, whether it be in your eyes or whether it be on your body. Of course, you can see it visibly. Everything's turning red. But a broken arm, a broken bone is something very, very much different. As I said, he continued to use the broken arm. Never even slowed down. If anything, as I said, after that first round, after he probably lost that first round, definitely lost that first round to Jalen Turner, he turned it on even more in the second, turned it on even more in the third, and went out there. And I know it was a split decision. I think it was a unanimous decision. I think he had his foot on the gas the entire second half of that fight, the second and third round. So hats off to him. Dan Hooker proving once again, as he always is, one of the biggest dogs, one of the biggest savages, not just in the lightweight division, but in the entire sport. So it was an absolute pleasure to watch him. And as I said, Dan Hooker is still that dude. We can't be sleeping on him. I believe he should get a top 10 opponent next and climb his way back into those rankings with a kind of a performance like this. Not just a performance from the standpoint that he just beat a very, very tough guy in Jalen Turner, but the standpoint that he broke his arm, he was bloodied up. He didn't look perfect in there. Yeah, he lost that first round for sure, but these are the kind of guys that we love in the sport. So hats off to Dan Hooker. I hope he gets a top 10 guy next. And as I said, you guys put some respect on the guy's name. Dan Hooker is that dude. So UFC 290 was phenomenal. Dan Hooker was one of the cornerstones of that card. It was phenomenal to watch him. I will always be a Dan Hooker fan. I know I'm not afraid to admit that. I'm the kind of guy where I could be fans of the guys who are in my division, and it still doesn't mean if he climbs back into the rankings, we have to fight each other. I'm still going to be a fan of his work, even though I'm going to try to take his head off. So hats off to Dan Hooker. God bless. We'll see you at the top.